OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODAloop.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the OODAcast podcast. In this episode, we're going to do something very unusual. I think for our listeners, you're all familiar with Bob and Matt, and they're typically the hosts of the show. But this time, Matt agreed to do something different, and he's one of the dignitaries in our field. He's done so much. He's a professor, he's a mentor, he's a founder, and he's written so much, but I don't think he's ever been interviewed on his own podcast. So we
I
thought
have
we'll turn the
actually. Yeah,
table.
we
Oh,
I
you
did one on
have?
business.
Tell
Yeah,
me.
Jen Hoare interviewed me on business and startups and stuff like that back during the first year. So it was a fun conversation.
Okay, I stand corrected. This will be the second time we're interviewing
Second
Matt on
time,
the
yeah.
podcast, but this time we can focus on different things. And it's been, I believe, a few years since you've done this.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. So, to begin with, I was thinking that although most of our listeners and viewers would know who you are, I thought we could start with a brief introduction. And for that, I actually went to Matt GPT. And for those of you who don't know, yep, for those of you who don't know, that's a LLM that has been trained on Matt's interviews and his papers, and also he has a curated collection of, I believe, over 2,000 articles that Matt has chosen. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, I think it's up to about 2,500,
Nice.
articles, academic journals, government reports. There's a few books in there as well.
Nice. So let me read you what Matt GPT came up with when I asked it to introduce you. So it said, Matthew Devost is a dynamic figure in the fields of cybersecurity, counterterrorism, and risk management. As the CEO and co-founder of OODA LLC, Matt brings a strategic vision honed over decades of experience at the nexus of technology, security, and entrepreneurship. His career includes founding the influential cybersecurity consultancy FusionX, as well as leading the Terrorism Research Center as president and CEO. A recognized thought leader, Matt has served on the Blackhat review board, shaping the agenda of the world's largest cybersecurity conference, and has been a trusted advisor to the U.S. Department of Defense. His academic contributions are equally notable, having taught at Columbia University and been a fixture at Georgetown University, where he educated future leaders in cybersecurity. So, Matt, I think that's a pretty cool
Well,
introduction,
yeah.
but what do you think?
Yeah, that I'm glad that it was able to be concise as well. I get accused too often of my bio being a bit too long just because I've been all over the map over the past 30 years.
That's, I think that's given how much you have achieved, it's really hard to make this more succinct. But is there anything that Matt GPT missed?
I mean, it missed a lot, but I think it hit the high points, right? In that I've been involved in this field for quite some time. I'm most well known for a couple of different organizations, FusionX and the Terrorism Research Center. Although I have been, founder or executive at multiple others. I was one of the key founding employees at iDefense. Was an early contributor, third person hired into the information assurance practice at SAIC, which is SAIC/Leidos now that they've split off. Um, that seems notable just because our group was so small. And now if you look at, the size of business that entity has in cybersecurity, it's, multi-billion dollars worth of business for them. Um, Tulco Holdings and Eyesight Partners also along the way were two notable companies that I worked with, and then captures the stuff that I do that is outside of the commercial aspect, being on the Blackhat review board, having taught at Georgetown and now at Columbia, and then also on the board of several nonprofits. I was a founding board member for the um, Cyber Conflict Studies Association, which did many great things by way of contributing books and conferences and and meetups in the field, and also on the nonprofit board at Mission Link and the University of Vermont as a trustee. So also try to stay involved in the community at kind of that philanthropic level as well.
That's awesome. The next question I'd like to pose to you is about your origin story, but something that I think your bio omitted is all your contributions to Hollywood and the creative side, and we'll get back to that. I'll
Okay.
leave that for a little later, but let's hear your origin story, Matt.
Yeah, I am a small country boy, small town country boy. I grew up in a very rural area in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, was educated in a one-room schoolhouse, if you can believe that, up until seventh grade. And then we traveled to a high school that was about 14 miles away one way. And even with the traveling 14 miles, my graduating class from high school was only 19 kids. So very small, not really accessible from a tech perspective. In fact, I used to lament as a teenager because my small town was a long distance phone call just even to the town that I went to high school in. So, trying to call friends and, just hang out on the phone was a little bit cost prohibitive, um, and not hugely connected from a technology perspective. But I did get access to my first computer. I don't even recall exactly what age, 12, 13, somewhere in that range. That was a Commodore 64. And that for me opened up a whole brave new world. I became obsessed with the creativity, what I could, the code that I could write, the games that I could create. I was discouraged that there was no such thing as a hockey game, and I was a big hockey fan, so I wrote one and charged my brother
That's
and
awesome.
our one neighbor down the street a quarter to play it, right? So I kind of opened my own arcade. Um, so I became obsessed with the kind of the creativity, what I could code, and kind of the world that opened up as I got access to my first computer. And that really was my origin, and an interest in technology. It advanced from there, in college, I ended up studying national security studies and computer science. I was still doing all the coding. In the summers, I worked doing construction, but also as a software developer. In fact, I teamed up with a person about an hour away, and we'd just go knock on the doors of an auto parts manufacturing shop and say, "Hey, we can help you. We can help you do create a parts inventory system, so you know exactly what's on the shelf and when to reorder." And we would go and write that software. It was also in college that I had what I call kind of my aha moment. Once I got to college, I got very connected into the hacker community. I was connecting to the hacker bulletin boards and had made some friends. I had attended a couple of conferences already, so it kind of had that, kind of connectivity in. And then I was also at national security studies with a focus on asymmetric threats and kind of gray areas. And I had this realization that our increasing dependence on technology, which seemed inevitable to me, the commercialization of the internet was inevitable. The banks and the government and everyone was getting connected via computer systems and computer networks. And then on the hacker side of the equation, I saw that all of that was vulnerable. They were getting broken into on a recurring basis. The hacker community was super active in pointing out these flaws. And then the national security person in me had the realization that this was a new national security risk. So that was really a turning point in my career when I had that kind of moment where I was like, wait a minute, we are increasingly dependent on computer technology. That computer technology is incredibly vulnerable, and that creates a national security risk that is going to be exploited by others. Unbeknownst to me, the US government had come to the same conclusion. The first year I wrote my paper in 1992, the government issued a top secret directive on information warfare. So they were thinking the same things. I just was kind of operating in a vacuum based on my own hypotheses. And that led to me writing my thesis on the topic of national security in the information age. And that, was a catapult for my career in the space.
That was a great paper, by the way. I read it. It was one of the first things that I read when I moved to Washington, D.C. a few months ago, and it was so prescient and so forward leaning, and you had so many conclusions and observations that came true from that paper. It's fascinating to see that someone that didn't have access to the high side, to the documentation that was classified, could come up with something so so good and so accurate. So that was kudos to you, Matt. I hope that this is a part of Matt GPT as well.
Yeah, it definitely has been uploaded in, and I revisit it. In the OODA loop, I did a 25-year retrospective where I kind of looked through kind of what did I get right, what did I get wrong, and it was interesting with regards to the number of things that the paper got right. And it was a little disheartening in that a number of the recommendations that I made in 1995, the year that that was published, are still recommendations that government executives and other leaders are making today. So it kind of also
Yeah.
shows that the field has matured a bit, but has also not matured in some really critical ways.
I was about to ask you, you have been one of the earliest hackers in the US. You saw how the culture evolved, how our community evolved. What are three main ways in which you see our community evolving from 1995 to today?
In the hacker community in particular.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the hacker community early on, the one that I got exposed to, really was about the exploration of these new technologies and developing, an affinity group, a trust group amongst folks that had that same passion. So the folks that I interacted with were super curious about technology, wanted to figure out how it worked, wanted to get access to networks and the internet, wanted to figure out what was wrong with the technology in order to make it better. And at that point in time, the only way to do that, realistically, was to access other people's computers, right? So you had a lot of very curious hackers out there that were accessing systems non-malicious in nature, non-criminal in nature. They simply were explorers, and it was, they had to kind of hop on the boats without a ticket in order to explore the seas that were the internet or the technologies at the time. So a tremendous amount of curiosity. Of course, there was a criminal element, and there were hijinks, and there were things that were taking place. But really, the folks that I interacted were mostly focused on that natural curiosity. The nice thing is today that natural curiosity still exists and is still the driver for the hacker community to understand how complex systems work and to take them apart, into their component elements and then put them back together and maybe put them back together in a more efficient way or a more secure way. So that part has stayed the same. What's happened in the interim is that technology has become incredibly accessible. And now for, $200 at a flea market, you can run your own version of the Linux operating system in your basement and you can hack that and you can go and join these capture the flag initiatives that are run and accessible for free, or these test range environments, or you can participate in bug bounty programs, or you can travel to a conference like DEF CON where there are dozens of villages. Are you interested in hacking industrial control systems? Well, here's some things. Do you want to understand how airplane avionics work? Here's something you can hack again. Do you want to hack a Tesla or an 18-wheel tractor trailer? All of that stuff is accessible. So it really is incredible now that the hacker community, with the technology accessible, have become that, um, the bringers of the truth around the technology and the vulnerabilities that it has, and the research is much more accepted. I think that's another thing I can remember in the early days of cybersecurity and hacker conferences, the lawsuits coming in or the cease and desist orders, and having to help Jeff Moss remove pages from a 3-ring binder because there was going to be a lawsuit from a big company. That stuff is few and far between. We see it. We just saw it in Ohio recently, where a researcher told disclosed to the press that the city government was lying about the nature of information that was stolen in a ransomware attack, and the government went after them, and the hacker community kind of rallied around in support. But for the most part, these are viewed as legitimate activities, and they are embraced. You have the White House and another dozen government entities, CISA, et cetera, all participating in these security conferences, all participating in hacking events like DEF CON. You have hacking the Pentagon as a bug bounty initiative. You have the White House helping put a satellite into space that can be hacked, and hack AI initiative. So it really has become embraced, and it's no longer kind of in the shadows or just a small collective. It's become a societal force as well.
That's awesome. How has AI changed that discussion and that landscape? Do you see it more? And this is probably a question you get a lot, but I'd love to get into specifics on with regards to, is it giving advantage to the defenders, or is it giving the advantage to the attackers? From your perspective and everything you're learning,
Yeah, I
what is your
think
opinion?
I think as we've seen over time, technology tends to advantage the attacker, but with AI, I think that the jury is still out. It's still new enough. Certainly, it'll be used to automate bad things, but I think it can also be used to automate on the defense side. And
Hmm.
then one area where I feel like it's really going to contribute is this the ability to be kind of like an advisor. You talked about Matt GPT. I mean, Matt GPT, as it relates to all of the knowledge that it's consumed, is smarter than I am because it can operate with perfect memory. My memory is flawed. I like to give the example of I was on a call with the ARK Invest team, and I was trying to remember a book that I cited in my thesis. And of course, it's 29 years ago. And I went on Google and I asked Google, I couldn't remember the title, and I just kind of gave it some basic, parameters. It couldn't find it. I went on Amazon, couldn't find it on Amazon. And then I said, oh, geez, I'll just go ask Matt GPT. And I asked the Matt GPT, just said, hey, you cited a book in your thesis that talked about accidents in critical infrastructure. What was it? And it popped it up immediately. It
Nice.
was Normal Accidents by Charles Perrow. And here's why you cited it. And here's why it's important, right? Matt GPT knows all of the different names that are used for APT 28. It knows in detail the difference between NIST Cybersecurity Framework version 1.3 and 2.0. So these LLMs are incredibly powerful tools for us to be able to use them as kind of adjacent support entities to guide us, for us to ask questions, for us to brainstorm, for us to try new theories out. You can ask it to critique my thesis and it'll do a great job. So I mean, these are super powerful tools that we might have an attacker advantage in that they're able to write code that finds vulnerabilities, but we've got a really great defender advantage because of the kind of the cognitive element of this, right? The fact that we are creating what are, as it relates to the English language and coding and things, these thinking machines to support us.
I like your optimistic perspective and position, and I hope it continues to stay this way. Can you tell us a little bit about the companies you built? And I'm fascinated with your journey because they're so diverse. From terrorism to cybersecurity, automation, you have touched upon so many different industries. I'd love to hear exactly how you went from one into the other, and what was the most enjoyable or rewarding for you to create?
Oh man, I don't think I can pick a favorite. That's like asking a parent to pick a favorite child. They were all unique and incredibly valuable in their own regard, but I can step through kind of the high level catalyst for them. First, joining SAIC was an established company. What we built there was an information security, information assurance division, and that was great for me because SAIC at the time was super entrepreneurial. It was employee owned. I think Bob Beister, the CEO at the time, owned 3%. You had the ability to go and create new divisions and offer up new things, and was seen as almost kind of an innovation center for some U.S. entities. And I took full advantage of that. I mean, I proposed and built the first DoD Red Team. I supported things like the President's Commission on Critical Infrastructure Protection, which led to PDD 63 and the creation of the ISAC. So I would work with the Secretary of the Navy's team on writing the Navy's first, information warfare policy, and the first Defense Science Board on information warfare defense. So I had this kind of great combination of being able to do really technical stuff. I would hack into an aircraft carrier one week, and then the next week I'd be sitting with a presidential commission, right, helping write what were strategic approaches to the next 20 to 30 years. It really was around that PSIP initiative and the imminent PDD 63 that got me to become an entrepreneur for the first time, because I was interacting with some other folks and I said, man, if the government is going to mandate the sharing of this, intelligence amongst the private sector, there has to be real legitimate demand that exists. So what if we just created a private sector cyber threat intelligence company? And they didn't exist at the time. I mean, iDefense really was the first. Uh, there were unique elements that had never been done before, that we did in producing those first cyber threat intelligence reports. So we did it, and we found a foothold in the market. We found early supporters, Steve Katz at Citibank coming in, and I remember working all night with my team. We literally pulled an all-nighter, and he showed up at the office, and it was this like scrappy little office over in, I think it was Annandale, Virginia, at secondhand office. We painted it ourselves, you know, as a used furniture that we had purchased through some sort of broker. I mean, venture capital didn't exist in the same capacity that it did today, so we were pretty scrappy. And Steve showed up, and I said, "Hey, you know, if you buy a subscription, this is going to show up in your inbox every day, every business day, 5 days a week." And he saw enough value, and I think wanted to really push the market in that direction, that he signed up, and then kind of that was the catalyst for it. And we proved the value. You know, that also was a time frame in which you could get early warning. You know, the Trojans and the viruses that were effective at the time, this being the late 90s, tended to be triggered based on dates and times and things of that sort. So if you had a really great network in New Zealand, you could see what was happening to New Zealand computers way before the rest of the world woke up, and we would get that early warning out, you know, including at some points in times basically saying like disconnect from the internet, like, you know, just be and that was a viable approach back then. So that was kind of, you know, the first cyber threat intelligence company. We saw the need in the market, and we worked to produce it. The Terrorism Research Center is somewhat similar. You know, I'd written this paper with my colleagues Neil Pollard and Brian Houghton called Information Terrorism, Can You Trust Your Toaster? Had attracted a lot of attention. I think we were the first, you know, peer-reviewed academic journal article, you know, we published in Terrorism and Political Violence
That's
out
fascinating.
of St. Andrews. And we wanted to do follow-up research. And it was, again, expensive to collaborate with people. You didn't have Skype and, you know, all of these services. You had to have long distance phone calls. And we decided at the time, like, hey, let's create kind of a secure version of an extranet before they were even called extranets. Let's create some message boards and some file sharing, and let our friends that are in, you know, Sri Lanka and Australia and kind of all over the world connect in, and let's collaborate on research. And so we started doing that. And we wanted to publish a follow-on to the toaster paper, and we couldn't find a viable place to publish it online. One frustration that we had is that the academic journal process, as you're familiar, is super slow with peer review, and we felt like it was moving too slow for the world. In fact,
Exactly. That's not good for technology. It's already
yeah,
outdated
yeah.
by the time you publish it. Absolutely.
So we said, well, let's stop going in this peer-reviewed journal piece. Let's just put it on the internet. And so we created a portal to do that, and as a result, incorporated the Terrorism Research Center, and we just started publishing and collaborating. And then organizations started coming to us and saying, "Hey, can we pay you to do a study on this particular issue?" You know, for example, a Japanese car company would say, "Can you help us understand the risk of, you know, of kidnapping in South America?" Or a defense industrial based company would come and ask us something, and then some jurisdictions would come and ask us, "Hey, can you create a training program for us, you know, around this concept of what we were calling at the time Homeland Security, even though this well predates the Department of Homeland Security or 9/11." And then we started producing intelligence. We started producing a daily, what was like a version of the president's decision brief, the PDB, out to folks, and offering content on our website and selling subscriptions to it. And then the world shifted tremendously on September 11th. And it turned out that we had the credibility in the market because we weren't seen as being exploitative of the circumstances of 9/11. We were already there. We were already doing the research. We were already publishing and running this training. And we had the capability. You know, we had this deep bench. We had been studying radical Islamic websites and had an active terror web watch program. We had multiple grants where we were building what were intelligence centers in 6 different jurisdictions in the US. We had a responder knowledge base that we were working on that was kind of a one-stop shop for first responders that wanted to figure out how to buy equipment and associate those with training and standards, et cetera. So as a result, that was kind of a huge catalyst. The world shifted. We were in a position to provide a ton of value, and we ended up doing a ton of stuff on the training, the private sector intelligence and security side, and a tremendous amount on the government side as well. And those little programs like that, you know, 6-city terrorism early warning group expansion project, once DHS stood up and they got aware of it, they came and said, well, can you expand that to 56 cities? So we ended up building it in 56 cities, and it became the fusion centers that are operated by DHS today. So very interesting in that regard. Eyesight Partners, was another cyber threat intelligence company John Waters had decided to build, and he brought me in as the COO, and we kind of mixed it up a little bit. We wanted to mix up how the service was delivered. We wanted to mix up how things were collected. We took a very regional approach where we built an office put an office in China, first of its kind for a cybersecurity company. We put one in India, we put one in South America, we put one in Europe. Obviously we had a couple US locations, and kind of took a very kind of localized collection, international synthesis, but with a more tech-enabled delivery. And of course, the Eyesight Partners now exists as part of the Google Threat Intelligence team, through a couple of acquisitions. And then FusionX, I call FusionX kind of my back to the future company. Uh, I knew that I wanted to start another company. I had three ideas on my whiteboard, and one of them was this back to the future. Let's get back to doing really threat-centric, threat-enabled red teams. Let's remove some of these handcuffs, traditionally put on what was happening in the market at the time with vulnerability assessments and red teaming. It wasn't very realistic. There were a lot of artificial constraints, and having been a protege of General Van Riper, one of the great military war game generals operating as the red team, I wanted to disrupt that market. So that was an idea that I had along with two others. And it turns out that the market started speaking to me. I started getting phone calls of like, Matt, like we're getting our butts kicked. We need to do something different. We really need to understand how we're vulnerable to real attackers that want to steal money out of our bank or steal our intellectual property. So we built a really specialized red teaming company that did that. We did the threat actor emulation. We were the first ones to refer to it as adversary simulation, or adversary emulation, which is now a market where there's hundreds of companies providing that service. And then we built a really great culture and capability that we went out and executed in the market and just had a great time with a great team providing tremendous value during what was a really critical time frame. It was kind of what I call it the rise of the APTs. We'd been writing and talking about APTs in 2008, 2009, but with the launch of FusionX in 2010, it was really kind of front and center with what we wanted to do. And then I got two more. It feels like it's a long catalyst. Telco Holdings
Great.
was a conversation that I had with Thomas Tull around an idea that he had to basically go out and create an investment holding company that would focus on how data science and machine learning, what we would call today kind of AI in the market, could contribute new value to non-technology companies. Built this great team there at Telco Labs that would go and help these entrepreneurs, and we would try and deliver value from a machine learning data science perspective. And that was great as well, because I just got to learn a lot more about how technology really can impact traditional businesses and how it can be an accelerator for growth, or how some companies might be sitting on a tremendous amount of value. They just don't know how to tap into it, but it is accessible through data science and machine learning.
Which
And
sectors did you think were most benefiting from that?
Definitely stuff that was doing kind of direct to consumer in the retail space, because the amount of data available, from an advertising perspective and the granularity and kind of the momentum that you could establish, that was super eye-opening. And that was Thomas's primary lesson as well. He had previously run Legendary Pictures, and they had that legendary analytics team run by this guy, Matt Meralda, who still is kind of, from my perspective, one of the best in the world at looking at those issues. And they had come to that conclusion, right, that you could just really get granularity with regards to who you engaged with, who you communicated with in the market. Whereas previously the approaches had been kind of a shotgun, just got to advertise to everyone. I remember Thomas telling me about his journey with Legendary, that, he was frustrated because they were producing a new Batman movie, and he told his team, I don't want to advertise to the grandmother who's never going to go see Batman, no matter how many times we put an ad in her browser. And he's like, but I also don't want to advertise to the 17-year-old teenager who already knows about it and is already going to go, right? We need to find that sweet spot of people who are unaware and whose behavior we can influence, right? So seeing the viability there was super interesting. And
That's
then
fantastic.
most
And the last
recently
one?
with OODA, OODA was really to provide, high level advisory and strategic consulting, not just on cybersecurity, but on kind of business and market enablement, and also to create a resource, the OODA network that we
Mhm.
felt like was missing. There was a frustration that Bob Gorley and I had. If I wanted as a decision maker to understand quantum computing, I could go and I could read some stuff in a magazine or in a newspaper. And there's some great journalists out there, but it's really hard to capture the essence of a complex topic like that. And then I could go to a trade journal and I could read something that was pretty technical and super informative, but then I get to the bottom and it says sponsored by IBM, and my kind of heart would sink. I'm like, okay, I've only got IBM's perspective on quantum
Mhm.
computing. We wanted to create a resource where you could have a completely independent research team that could write and publish on these topics, and then we could bring a member group together almost as like a co-op. I tell people it's kind of a co-op model. Everybody contributes a little bit of money to maintain their membership, and that pays for the research team. But then it also pays for us to get together and share our thoughts and our experiences with each other. So we do monthly meetings, where we cover kind of what's topical in the world geopolitically, from a cyber risk perspective, from a technology disruption perspective. We host dinners and events on blockchain and quantum computing and AI. We host events I know you've participated in at RSA and at Blackhat and at GeoInt and other locations. And then once a year, host a conference called OODAcon, where we bring everybody together for a day and a half and focus in on these issues. So that I think has been super valuable in the market. We have about 350 executives that participate now, and I know you've joined and briefed, both into the OODA network, and it's an interesting thing to behold.
Absolutely. It's actually a great community. I can vouch for that. And the members are very active and very interesting people. I've benefited greatly from it. And your events at different conferences are also fantastic. So, yes, the community is definitely wonderful. Another, you've created other things too. So, would you mind telling us a little bit more about the Hack Factory?
Sure. The Hack Factory, I call it a growth lab and startup studio that I operate in Reston, Virginia. And it has kind of two inspirations. One, when I was building FusionX, I was super frustrated that I couldn't find a spot to anchor the company back when we were in kind of that critical growth stage. Um, WeWorks, are kind of existing, but we're not a great culture fit, when you're trying to do something cybersecurity related. There are just kind of lots of complications around that type of model. And then the other kind of co-working spaces were accountants and lawyers, and, just again, very kind of difficult. So I had wished that there was a space that was kind of that, like, I'm too small to take out a 5-year lease, but I'm too big, to just take an office space and a co-working. Like we needed something a little bit better. So I wanted to build that to provide that value back to the community where entrepreneurs in network, it's curated, could have a trusted space that they could work and grow their business that wasn't trying to make money. With the Hack Factory, I'm not charging companies to make a profit. If they're in there from a curated co-working perspective, they're just paying their pro rata share of what the overall rent is, right? So that model is super supportive. And you don't have to sign a year contract. You just go month to month and you can scale up and scale down. And I've had entrepreneurs that have done that. They've scaled up and then scaled down and then scaled back up. And right, you could just be 100% supportive to your business. Um, and then the second piece of that was the brainstorming or the what I'll call the startup studio component. And that was really influenced by time that I spent with Max Levchkin, the original CTO at PayPal, current CEO at a firm, just super brilliant guy. And he had this startup space in San Francisco that I used to go sit in and meet with him where they just had whiteboards and they had really smart people and they would say, what should exist in the market that doesn't? And then they would build a little team and they would go build it. They'd build a prototype and they'd see how they felt about it and kind of try to understand the opportunity. And if there was a there, they'd start to build a team around it and then they'd go get funding. And it just seemed like a super efficient way to launch companies, more so than just being an angel investor or, having kind of a static role. I really wanted that dynamic element of it. So the second part of the Hack Factory serves as this startup studio where we are ideating companies there from scratch and building them with the teams and then taking them to market. And that's been, super fulfilling in that regard. And then the last piece I say is kind of a brainstorming community. We use it to host events. I mentioned we host OODA events there. We've hosted events for politicians looking to engage with the technology community. We've hosted events for our partners in Ukraine to get them to meet, innovative technology companies and investors in the area. I offer it up for several nonprofits to use for free as well. So there's a community component to it as well, just in making the space available and doing interesting things there.
And I just want to add that it is very well stocked with all sorts of drinks from from energy drinks to alcohol. There's anything people need to help the
Yeah,
creativity flow.
I do have what I call our caffeine fridge, which is my homage to, the Hack Factory name. And of course the hacking as hack, being one element of the inspiration. But the factory, really the inspiration being the factory space that existed in New York City that was this kind of unique collaboration between artists and thinkers and storytellers. And so that kind of emulation. And the fridge is full of all different sorts of caffeine that you can consume, including kind of the original Ball's soda in the blue glass bottles. And Club Mate for our European hackers that are in town. They're always super surprised. And then everything in between, the Red Bull and the Monster and the Ghosts and all that fun stuff.
You're taking your drinks very seriously, Matt.
Mhm.
So I almost want to start a company now after I've seen the Hack Factory, just to
Yeah.
come and hang out there. It's a really good space.
Mhm.
So let's move on to some of your creative pursuits, because it's I haven't really heard you talk about them as much, but you and I have had discussions, and I find that aspect of your life fascinating because, at least in my understanding, we have a community and it's growing. But in order to reach the broader audiences in the US and abroad, because they could be targets, they could be participants in information warfare, we need to go to Hollywood and spread the message through pop culture. So I'd love to hear some of your stories. How did you get connected to Hollywood? What have you worked on? What are some of the projects that you found most rewarding?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. It's been a very small contribution, and one kind of active project I can't speak to that is super fun that's kind of in the cyber thriller space. But I did get to work on the movie Blackhat. My friend Rodney Farron, who is a former CIA officer that has had a production company and actually produced a show on TV and participated in many others, brought me into that. It was a Michael Mann film, and I'm a huge fan of Michael Mann, so I kind of jumped, at the opportunity to work with him, with Chris Hemsworth as the star. And really, though, in that experience, they had a fully developed script and screenplay, and kind of the role I was able to fill, not just, in general providing advice and perspective and kind of filling them in on kind of how I see the world. Was the challenge was there were multiple times where they wanted the plot to move forward, and typically, plots are moved forward through an interaction between two primary characters in the movie, or an event, right? Something blows up or there's some major catalyst that is advancing the plot. And in this one, they said, well, we want to have technology be kind of an enabler here. We want to have technology be a component. So it was fun to work with that crew to think through the kind of how technology can be an enabler in a plot, but then also to keep it very realistic as well. That was definitely fun projects, fun to, go and participate in the screening and see your name in the credits and see FusionX in the credits, was kind of a unique experience. And then I've done other consulting for friends, that are building television shows or writing scripts, and kind of that's always fun to be the technologist there. And then also on books. I mean, I've had the opportunity to be the technical editor, on some books going back to hacking a terror network, which was a lot of fun with my friend Russ Rogers, to being a technical editor on something like David Ignatius's The Director. That
I
one was
just finished that one.
super, yeah, that
Hmm.
one was super fun for me in that I spent enough time with David, and I dragged him out to DEF CON 1 year as well, that you actually see yourself show up in the book, right? As these like components of characters or composites of characters. So that was super fun to see what were my experiences with David translate to the experience of characters in the book. So that was fun. And I also, loved the fact that in the reviews, it was being held as incredibly credible
You
from a
mentioned real.
technology
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah, so I was able to keep that realism in there and keep things well
And,
grounded.
and also in his acknowledgments, you were the first person he thanked
Yeah,
in the
okay,
second
yeah.
paragraph.
There we
Yeah,
go,
that
yeah.
was definitely impressive. And when I started reading the book, it opens with a DEF CON tour.
It
So
does,
you're
yes.
literally in the
And
first
that is,
chapter.
yeah, that is David and myself, he was a great sport. I brought him out there. It definitely was a kind of a culture shift, bouncing around that. But
Oh
he
yeah,
actually even
I
came
bet.
out to, I remember bringing him to a ninja party, that was super late at night, lots of cool people, lots of fun stories, and, he was just eating it up. The project that I'm currently working on, uh, brought the producer out to DEF CON, and we had a great time. Again, he came out to the black and white ball, and we sat on the carpet and we talked to really smart hackers. And there's just a great element. I mean, the hacker subculture is so incredibly fascinating, right? I think it has been, a component of major film projects, and cybersecurity is increasingly showing up in television shows and in film projects. But I think there's just so much untapped potential there as well.
I completely agree with you. And now the combination between cyber operations and hack and leak operations and disinformation and AI, there are so many threats in the digital domain. And I'm still reading on the different interferences by different nation states in the European elections or in Taiwan. There are just
Mm.
so many examples. We don't even have to be that creative. We just have to read the news
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a
yeah.
few
It's hard to
blogs.
keep up.
Exactly. Yes. And with the Ukrainians as well, I imagine you have your own stories.
Mhm.
Matt, what is the most interesting story recently you have heard about our industry?
Most interesting story. Uh, the stuff that I find most interesting right now is what I would kind of categorize as like collective defense, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
the collaboration that takes place in the cybersecurity research community and amongst the partners in these different companies. It really is great to see that come together to prevent a crisis, to respond to a crisis, right? So I'm constantly in awe at the work that's being done by the cybersecurity community behind the scenes, and oftentimes without acknowledgement and without seeking, credit or fame. They're just solving these hard problems. And I see that firsthand on a almost weekly basis. And for that, I'm and have a tremendous amount of gratitude for the visibility and ability to participate in a small way, but just also am in awe of what that community has been able to do. I have had,
Awesome.
some fun direct adventures over the past year, tracking down some nefarious, kind of fraudsters. Unfortunately, the court cases associated with those are still sealed, so I can't talk about them. But had me traveling around the globe and leading a search and seizure in a house, with the police and kind of actively tracking down some bad guys. So I'm looking forward to being able to share that, in greater detail at some point in time. And then I've also been super fascinated, and I'm giving you three responses to one question, so I apologize for that. But in the research and insight that's being provided through some of these leak data sets that exist, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of power disruption associated with some of the leaks that are coming out. And we saw that with some of the patriotic Ukrainian hackers targeting Russian banks and law firms, et cetera. And, the visibility that provided. You see it
Mm-hmm.
with entities like the New York Times Visual Investigation Team, where they're tracking Russian ghost oil fleet, trucks, and just doing all of this incredible open source research. So the open source component, of this and how that's
Mm-hmm.
evolved to include some of these alternative data sets has been
Oh
super
yeah.
fascinating. And it's an area that we've also been focusing on with one of the companies in the startup studio as well.
Yeah, something that we can talk about because it's been published was Bellingcat's report in the beginning, not the beginning, but I think it was the first year of the war, where they managed to track the officers that were giving the coordinates for missile strikes in
Yep.
Russia through their communication, through some photos. It was put together in a brilliant way. Everything was open source.
Yeah, Kristen Del Rosso and I did a LabsCon talk last year that we kept under Chatham House rule just because of, slap lawsuits, et cetera. But it was using some of the same data sets to find unattributed oligarch assets in the United States.
Yeah.
Right. Also pretty interesting
Oh,
use
absolutely.
if you have those OSINT skills. The open source is interesting for me. One of the first conferences I attended 1993 timeframe was one of the original open source intelligence conferences. And back then, there you didn't have a lot of believers, right? We still thought of intelligence as something that could only happen from a classified perspective and, through classified sources and SIGINT and HUMINT and kind of this, very specific clandestine collection activities. And I remember having the conversations at the time frame that no, like as we start to move online, that the value from an open source intelligence perspective is going to be huge. And I remember back then, them saying it was going to be like a 7-year revolution, and it certainly felt like a revolution. I mean, there is so much that can be done now through open source intelligence that it's mind-boggling as well.
True. And the language barriers no longer really apply if we have technology to do the translations.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no, I
Oh.
read Russian now, right? Because my browser auto translates it for me, right? So I mean, it's yeah,
Impressive.
yeah, it's like my language skills have gone through the roof over the past
Oh.
several years, all because of the Google Translate plugin, in my browser, which I guess is not even a plugin anymore. It's just a native capability in the
Oh,
browser.
yeah. I thought I was special because I spoke Bulgarian and no one would care to learn it. And now look, yeah, you can also translate that now. So
Yep.
no more special, Bilyana. I totally get it. So, Matt, speaking of interesting things and creativity and everything you've done, you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I was wondering if you would share with us, if you were to write a book, what would that book be?
Yeah, I have a couple different ideas that I've thrown over. I mean, on the nonfiction side, still have in me a book that talks about these experiences that I've had, which have been fairly unique, and kind of the lessons that can be drawn from that, right? As well as kind of a viewpoint on the future. So, I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
a book in there that's certainly based on those
For sure.
experiences and, hacking the aircraft carriers and the submarines and the banks and kind of all that fun stuff. Uh,
Can I just
uh,
mention when I asked Matt GPT to give me one fun fact about you, because we had a good conversation,
mhm.
and he said exactly that. I used to hack aircraft carriers and banks.
It's a
It was really, that's the fun fact about you.
Yeah, it's been interesting to kind of, operationalize those types of attacks. That was something unique at FusionX, is we would steal money out of the bank, right? The aircraft carrier, we were getting access to command and control systems on the aircraft carrier while it was deployed at sea. I mean, those make for really interesting stories.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
they're not good movies because, everything was kind of text based and, you just watch things scrolling. But, when you realize the implications of what we were able to accomplish and what we got access to through some of those attacks, it was crazy.
Better you than
Um,
our adversaries.
Yep. On the fiction side, I'd say there's a couple of ideas that I've always had, and I don't want somebody to write my book, but one that has uh, stuck with me is the role that, augmented reality and virtual reality and other technologies are going to play. I have my Apple Vision Pro. I actually wrote an article and wrote a paper, academic paper in 1992 on virtual reality, right? So it's a technology that I've been playing with for quite some time. I can envision in the not too distant future where from an augmented reality perspective, we're going to be wearing glasses or have contacts that are basically going to supplement us all the time with information, with art. The analogy I always use is you and I might be sitting at a bar, and instead of a TV playing a single football game, there's just going to be a green screen. And my feed will be displaying for me the game that I want to watch, and your feed will be displaying the game that you want, or not displaying anything, or displaying CNN, or whatever it might be. And so I think there's a fascinating storyline around our increasing dependence on that type of technology and how powerful it will be in the context of what if there was a state-sponsored attack or, from an espionage and intelligence perspective that we're suddenly able to hack it. What if I could start to put incorrect things in your feed or make you see things that weren't there?
Mhm.
So there's a fun story that, I've been playing around with for a while that would pull on those threads of almost, a war games-esque pursuit to find one of the foundational creators of this technology because it's been hacked and we can't figure out how, and it's causing some sort of national security issue. And I think that is kind of the consensus I have around AI and some of these technologies as well is that they are going to be so empowering that it will be a national security issue if we are denied access to them, right? So when we think about these
Right.
technologies, we have to build them securely. We have to build them where they're robust and resilient because we're at this point of no turning back. It is going to be greatly disadvantageous to us if we have to turn away from these technologies in the future. We're going to be very dependent on them, the same way that we're dependent on the internet for everything today.
So, Matt, this almost sounds like a wargaming scenario for near future situation.
For
I was
sure.
wondering, how many years away do you think we are from that becoming a reality?
The augmented reality
Yes,
piece of it,
from
yeah, I think it's going to happen in the next decade, right? Whether it hits in like a persistent contact, in my eyes type form in the next 10 years, that I'm not as, up on the medical science component to that. I think we're pretty close now. Uh, but as it relates to just glasses augmentation that we become dependent on that tie us into AI, I think that
Mhm.
starts to happen in the next 5 years. I mentioned, I have the Apple Vision Pro, I have the Vertu glasses where I can plug a little Samsung phone into these glasses and get a 160-inch screen in front of me, right?
Yeah.
That is accessible. I was one of the early adopters, in that program for Google with Google Glass, and I remember using that and thinking, man, this is crazy. I've got this persistent data stream that's always visible to me. And that was super low tech, but it could give me directions. And I remember a great little like icebreaker app where if somebody else had Google Glass and you're at the same social event, it would kind of guide you towards each other. Um,
Wow.
I could get messages and, this data. And that was, gosh, man, I mean, like 13, 14 years ago, maybe even more than that. So these next version, of display technology that we just wear as lenses and regular glasses that augment us through access to AI and visual analytics, that's going to happen in the next 5 years, and it's going to be super powerful.
Maybe there's a company in the making in the hack factory on that
Maybe
topic.
it's capital intensive, right? So, we don't
Yeah.
have a ton of capital in the hack factory, but it's definitely coming. I mean, you have major research initiatives in all of these major companies around these technologies, and I can't wait for the day when I put on just a pair of regular glasses that give me the augmentation. And again, they exist today. They're just not, as widely adopted.
Yeah. Not for the public consumption yet. That's fascinating, Matt. Is there anything else you would like to talk about today? Apart from the last question about the book you're currently reading or the book that you would like to recommend to our listeners and audience, I've watched a few of your podcasts and listened to them.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, no, there's one closing thought I would leave folks with, and this is a story around the power of technology disruption and our inability as human beings to understand exponential, advancements in technology. So what we are experiencing right now with AI and these other technologies is exponential, right? And exponential, you're kind of
Right.
doubling year over year. It's hard for you and I to understand that. And, the analogy I always use or is the story, the fable around the story of the creation of chess, where there's a king that is bored and calls on his kingdom to create some new games and new ways, of recreation. And this peasant arrives with the game of chess, and the king is just overwhelmingly happy with the creation of this game. And he says to the peasant, I will give you anything as your reward, just name it for me. And the peasant says, well, Your Majesty, I would take just a single grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, and 2 on the second, and 4 on the third, and 8 on the fourth. And just double every time over the 64 squares. And the king kind of reacts and says, like, oh my gosh, how cheap, and just a game like this for a pile of rice. But if you do the mathematics on that, it turns out to be more rice than is, created by the modern economy globally over a combined like 70 years. It's a massive amount, those grains of rice. And that number starts to get really big once you hit the back half of the chessboard. It starts to get incomprehensibly large. When we think about technologies like AI, we tend to see like, oh, ChatGPT launched a year and a half or 2 years ago, so we're on square number two. But the reality is that we are already on the back half of the chessboard. So the increase that we see from year to year is going to be exponentially greater and almost incomprehensible to us, right? If you think about just what we've seen in the GPT capabilities, or the ability for AI image generation, or now we have AI that is doing video generation. And I remember the day that OpenAI announced the real-time video generation, I went on Twitter or LinkedIn or something and said, "Oh man," I said, in 18 months, I bet we are going to see where AI is generating 3D virtual realities." So I could put my Apple Vision Pro on and I could say, "Today I would like to work at the top of the Eiffel Tower," and it's going to do that for me. Or today I want to work in an industrial grunge warehouse, and it's going to create that reality for me. And I'm thinking this is going to happen, in the next 18 months. And then within a week, OpenAI announced that as these AI technologies are creating these videos, that they are actually envisioning the entire 3D world associated with them. So they're already creating these 3D realities. They're just interpreting it as 2D for us to show us the video. So these changes are going to be super rapid and super hard for us to comprehend. We're going to get tremendous advantage from them. But we also, if we draw on the lessons learned of 30 years in cybersecurity, we need to make sure that they're secure and that they're trustworthy and they're resilient. So we have a great opportunity in front of us, and that we're going to be consistently amazed by technology, but we need to make sure as cybersecurity practitioners that we are helping make sure that development of those technologies is as secure and responsible as possible.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking of some of the applications: government training, cybersecurity trainings, counterterrorism trainings. Working from home becomes a thing because you can be in the office with the same people right now.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember talking with our friends from Ukraine, and them saying like, hey, in the future, we want to replace bureaucrats with algorithms, and, government services with smart contracts. I mean, like, this
yeah.
disruption is going to take place kind of across all levels of society.
Hopefully that also helps for accountability, the reduction of corruption, and so on. That'll be
Yes.
really a good corollary of that. That's fantastic. Matt, so what is one book that you would recommend for our audience today?
One book that I've read recently, or one book that I would recommend overall. No.
Let's start. Let's do both, because I actually wanted to ask you both. First, the
Okay.
one that you think everyone should read, and then the one that you recently read.
Yeah, so I'm in what I call kind of my summer thriller mode right now. I read 100 books a year. I publish a review on my newsletter every Sunday, the
That's
Global
fantastic.
Frequency. So, this is the pressure to produce 52 book reviews or book recommendations, which means I have to read about
You're busy.
100 to get 52 that I want to recommend. Uh, and in the summer, I give myself a little bit of leisure, and consume a bunch of different thriller books, including yours, which I had a lot of fun with, which I know is now
I'm
officially
glad.
available with Digital Mindhunters, which was a fun read. But the one that keeps sticking with me is this book by Terry Hayes called I Am Pilgrim. And it's probably one of the better kind of espionage with like a little bit of a mystery, criminal mystery built into it, just incredibly well written, great characters, great sense of space.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, when I think through and I read a bunch of these thrillers, those are ones that definitely kind of stick with me. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah. And then recently, man, I've been reading just, the Jack Carr and Brad Thor, and there's a group of summer thrillers that I've been invested in. Tom Clancy, with the books that come out of his estate. So, been having a ton of fun with those. I recommend anybody check those out. Especially Jack Carr and Brad Thor. I mean, they've just produced some incredible, fun thriller books that you can latch onto. But I also most recently read Unit X, which is the story of the Defense Innovation Unit. And I think that's an
I saw
important
that.
one for
Yes.
folks to read,
Yeah.
because it talks about, our government is a big, huge, expensive, slow-moving bureaucracy and not really great at technology adoption and technology disruption. And the only way that we can survive is that if we get better at that. And I think the DIU story is an interesting story about engaging with Silicon Valley, embracing technology, and it's the story of Palantir and Anduril, and these new waves disruptors. SpaceX, I would put in that category. I mean, if you just look at the way that SpaceX has democratized and made more robust the entire space economy. I have an investment through OODA Ventures with Bob in this company, Turian Space, that are, they got a warehouse and they built a satellite and they put it into space. I mean, that was unfeasible to think that you could do a decade ago, and now today is something that is accessible to just regular entrepreneurs. So that disruption, in order for the government to survive, they're going to need to understand and have some new approaches to how we think about technology enablement. And I thought that Unit X was useful from that perspective in providing one insight into one small program and that focus on innovation.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you, Matt. And on this note, we may conclude the interview. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.